Order. Welcome to this morning's session of the Foreign Affairs Committee and our first session with the new Secretary of State. So welcome both to the committee and congratulations on your appointment and
thank you
to this first formal session with the committee. And it's designed in that sense to be more open session than it might usually be inquiry into particular subjects, obviously associated with everything that is going on, and of course we are rather limited in the time you have available for the committee, so that is going to limit the subject coverage to a degree, and we will also then want to give us the opportunity. Then we may need to obviously we'll want to come back. This is going to be obviously an ongoing relationship, hopefully for both our sakes for some time. But I thought it would be appropriate to invite you to give us an opening statement, your tour d'horizon, as it were, for the committee, but not for too long before so we can get into the interrogative section. So
thank you.
I invite you to speak for about, lay out things for about 10 minutes, and then I'll ask my colleagues to begin questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blunt. A few years ago, I was travelling in the Gulf region on a trade trip, and I was having lunch, and a sheikh, who was my host, turned to me and he said, "What happened to you guys, i.e. the Brits? You used to run this place," he said. And actually he was quite right, because the British flag had only come down in that particular country in living memory, and yet we had faded from the scene. Whether it was because of a loss of confidence or Dennis Healey's despairing decision to chop UK influence east of Suez, we'd somehow become less present in that country, politically, culturally, commercially, and others had moved in. And as my host put it to me with slight mystification, you left us to the French. And Mr. Blunt, members of the Foreign Affairs Committee, I'm here to tell you this morning, insofar as that was ever true of the UK, that neglect is being reversed with astonishing speed. As I'm sure members of your committee know, our trade with the Gulf is booming. It's one of the fastest growing areas of trade for the UK now. Our relations in that area are better than ever. And after a period in which the Labour government all but ignored that region, I don't think Gordon Brown ever made an official visit to the country I'm speaking of. Our Prime Minister will, I hope this year, become the first female guest of honour at the Gulf Cooperation Council Summit, or so I'm told. And the reason for this growing engagement by the UK is at least partly that under William Hague, my predecessor, who reopened the language school, then under Philip Hammond, and now under this administration with the strong support of the Prime Minister, we have a Foreign and Commonwealth Office that is more energetic and outward-looking and more engaged with the world than at any time in decades. And that outward-looking spirit is present not just in the Gulf, but across the world. And I think it's going to intensify as we extricate ourselves from the EU treaty and we forge a new identity, as the Prime Minister has said, as a global Britain. And I mean global, because it is vital to understand what Brexit is and what it is not. Yes, it means restoring our democracy and control of our laws and our borders and a fair bit of cash, but Brexit is emphatically not any kind of mandate for this country to turn in on itself, to haul up the drawbridge, or to detach itself from the international community. And I know, as a former mayor of this city, how vastly our capital, and indeed our whole economy, has profited from London's role and the UK's role as a lodestar and a magnet for talent. And I believe there is no inconsistency whatever between the desire to take back control of our borders and the need to be open to skills from around the world. There is absolutely no inconsistency between ending the supremacy of EU law in this country, as we will, and being a major contributor to the security and stability and economic prosperity of the whole European region. We are leaving the EU, we are not leaving Europe. And over the last 3 months, I've been struck by how little I am asked about Brexit and how swiftly the conversation moves on to some other aspect of the UK's global role. And in an age of uncertainty, with democracy in retreat in some parts of the world, large parts of the Middle East in chaos, the demand is for more Britain, not less. And we can see that demand now most tragically and affectingly in Syria, where the people of Aleppo are hoping desperately that we and our allies may be able to do something to alleviate their suffering in the face of the barbaric assaults of the Assad regime with the connivance of Russia and Iran. And I must tell you, at this stage, it is vital that we do not raise false hopes. We know the difficulties and the implications of a no-fly zone or a no-bombing zone, and no matter how easy those concepts may sometimes be made to sound. But if there is more that we can reasonably and practically do, together with our allies, then of course we should consider those measures. And believe me, that work is now going on. But we should also take pride in what we are already doing. The second biggest donor of humanitarian aid to the region after the US, we fund the White Helmets, who drag people from the rubble after the airstrikes and who have themselves suffered terrible casualties. I've seen the work of British police training local Syrian police so that they are able to build public trust in the areas occupied by the moderate opposition. We're helping to clear mines and shells, and we should never forget that it is thanks, at least partly, to the bravery of RAF crews flying repeated missions over Iraq and Syria that we've helped reduce by 50% the territory of Daesh in Iraq and 20% their footprint in Syria. So whether it's through hard power in that way or through soft power, I think we sometimes forget in this country how much Britain is contributing around the world, helping to bring peace in Colombia, helping to get rid of the pirates off the coast of Somalia, leading the campaign to save the African elephant, now perilously endangered, from the same bands of gangsters, by the way, who are involved in the people trafficking that is helping to fuel the migration crisis. You look around the world and you see that this country is a massive force for good in an increasingly uncertain world, a world that is being deprived of leadership. And the values that we try to project, whether it's through our embassies or the British Council, which I think is a fantastic institution, or simply through the British companies or the 5 or 6 million Brits who live abroad, which is a bigger diaspora than any other rich country in the world. I think those values are not just good in themselves. They're there. When I speak of British values, I mean democracy, free speech, independent judiciary, equalities, rule of law, anti-corruption, support for civil society. They're good in themselves, they're ideals. But they're also economically advantageous for the areas in which the countries in which we try to project them. Because if you look around this city and this economy, I think it's pretty obvious that it provides the proof that political and social liberty are essential for sustainable economic prosperity. And that is one of the missions of Global Britain. But I think an outward-looking Britain is above all good for us. It's good for Britain. Because we are about, in the next few years, to be liberated, to go across the world and do a new set of free trade deals, an extremely exciting prospect. And to get back to the beginning of my remarks, we will be going out again to places where perhaps people haven't seen so much of us in the past, and places where they thought we had forgotten about them. And we have a superb FCO network to help make it happen, with more reach than our friends in France, a bigger network of embassies at only 70% of the cost. And finally, it's been one of the biggest privileges of my job in the last few months to meet our people who represent the UK to the world. They seem to me, my advanced years, they seem amazingly young, idealistic, very often intellectually brilliant, like the two people on either side of me, and I believe they are excited about the challenge of projecting global Britain, and they have a confidence, a real confidence and an optimism that I think comes with the knowledge that they are speaking for a soft power superpower. Thank you very much.
Secretary of State, thank you very much. Just before I invite colleagues to put questions to you, and how we're going to manage this is colleagues will have the opportunity to interrogate you on whatever subject they wish for the order of 10 minutes or so, and then I will come in and ask my own questions at the end. I just want to pick up one point out of your opening remarks, where I think we've recognised the renewed focus on the Gulf, started under Lord Haig, but all of that optimistic view about the reach of the Foreign Office and how energetic and active it is completely contradicted by the utterly dire resources situation your department finds itself in. Perhaps you could explain how on earth you're going to pay for these splendid aspirations, given the fact that half of your budget now appears to be constrained to areas that must be spent in that are ODA-able, in other words, limited out to the 0.7% of development expenditure. That the British Council budget is being cut from your department. It was the view of this committee that you were going to need to double or treble the resources available if we were to meet these aspirations post-Brexit, which I think the committee would no doubt share. But what comfort can you give us that you're actually going to be able to spend money in places like in Europe, on reinforcing our bilateral relations there in the wake of Brexit, because there doesn't appear to be any money kicking around at the minute.
Yeah, well, I think I would make a few points. Obviously, we live in straitened circumstances. We have to make our money go further than ever before, and we do. As I said, we have a bigger network than the French, with only 70% of the costs, and we're doing extremely well. We can be very, very proud of what we're achieving. The budget for the overall FCO budget, as you know, is rising from 1.1 billion to 1.24 billion by 2019-20. I think where you're spot on, if I may say, Mr. Blunt, is in pointing to the very considerable sums that are available for ODA spending, for DFID spending. We obviously have quite a lot of ODA spend that we do ourselves, but I think the game now is to make sure, and I know that my colleague Priti Patel is in total agreement with this. The game now is to make sure that UK ODA DACable funds are used in such a way as not just to serve development goals, as they undoubtedly must, but also to make sure that they mesh and they chime with our diplomatic and political objectives. And I see absolutely no contradiction in that approach, and that's something that I know that the government at all levels agrees on these.
Secretary, just to pick that point up, that's fine, but that only applies to those countries that are subject to development assistance. You can't spend that money elsewhere.
Sure.
It's all very well having money there, but actually where our game needs to be raised is with the rest of the world, where our principal markets, our principal existing markets are going to be, where obviously reinforcing the new work of the International Trade Department. But you can't do this on fresh air, and all you have is fresh air to do this on at the minute to meet these aspirations.
Well, I note that you gave my my predecessor quite a grilling about this when he last appeared before you, and he made a very good point that he could imagine bidding for more funds himself, and since he is now the Chancellor, I think I'm inclined to camp out, as they say in the Foreign Office, on what he had to say.
John Barrett.
Foreign Secretary, in welcoming you to your post, can we kick off, it may not surprise you, with Brexit. To many of us, the referendum gave a very clear message, and that is we're leaving. The government's position is very clear on this. We're going to take back control on immigration. We're going to introduce a fairer immigration policy that no longer discriminates against the rest of the world outside the EU, and we're going to obtain the best possible deal with regards accessing EU markets. It's a nonsense that there is so much noise about this, one could argue, given that if 170-odd other countries can trade from outside the EU very profitably, there's no reason why the fifth largest economy can't as well. But what would you say to the alarmists? Some would perhaps unfairly call them Ramonas, who believe that we're heading to hell in a handbasket. And what would you say to those who are genuinely concerned about developments and the uncertainty that this is creating?
I think that those who prophesied doom before the referendum have been proved wrong, and I think they will continue to be proved wrong. I think that obviously it will take time before the full benefits of Brexit appear, because after all we haven't even begun the process of leaving. So the whole thing is really very artificial and speculative. I do think that businesses investing in the UK can have the maximum possible certainty and assurance that our partners, our friends across the Channel have a huge interest in doing the best possible deal in goods and services for the sake of their companies, and our friends in the political world across the Channel have a symmetrical interest in doing a deal that will be for the benefit of their constituents and the people who elect them. And that's a deal that's going to promote the growth and prosperity of both the UK and the EU, and I'm sure that's what we'll produce. There may be some Sturm und Drang along the way, but that's how it'll end up.
Well, perhaps we should take comfort from the fact that the very people who were predicting doom and gloom if we didn't join the euro or if we left the ERM, well, many of those were predicting doom and gloom now, and perhaps there's comfort to be taken there. But can I just drill down a little bit on negotiations? One fully understands that a rolling commentary makes for poor outcomes. And despite the siren calls of certain members of this place, it's just ridiculous to think that can take place, and the government has been very clear that it won't take place. There'll be no rolling commentary. There'll be scrutiny perhaps, but no rolling commentary. But the EU's position itself is quite interesting. They are very much, and have been put it on the record, that they're linking immigration with access to the single market. They say it's one of the four founding principles, if you like. It's non-negotiable. You've described that approach as baloney, something like that. Say again?
Mais oui, I say.
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, there's a disconnect here. How are we going to get around this, do you think?
I genuinely, Mr. Brown, thank you very much for that question. So I genuinely think that there is a false connection, an unnecessary linkage in all these concepts. And actually, I vividly remember being ordered by the Belgian Interior Minister in 1989 to leave the country. They tried to deport me when I went to work abroad because I couldn't produce what was then called an attestation patronale. I had to show that I was economically viable in Belgium, and I had to go to the commune with a letter proving that I had a job. Now, this was, as you will readily appreciate, many years after the Treaty of Rome, many years after indeed years after the Single European Act. So the idea that the Brownian movement of individuals, of citizens across the surface of Europe is somehow there on tablets of stone in Brussels is complete nonsense. It is a fiction. We are taking back control of our borders as we said we would, and that's what we'll do. It doesn't mean, as I said in my opening remarks, that we are going to be hostile to people of talent who want to come and live and work here. And I think it's very important that we continue to send out a signal of openness and welcome to the many brilliant people who help to drive the London economy and indeed the whole of the UK economy.
Is there one though knotty problem that we've got to face and we haven't quite yet perhaps faced up to it, or perhaps we have behind closed doors, and that is our position ostensibly is access to the single market, and one can understand that, but at the same time we're going to be repealing the European Communities Act, and it is that act that gave force to the EU Court of Justice, which has jurisprudence with regards to the single market. There's a bit of a disconnect there, isn't there? How are you going to square that circle?
Well, I think that the Prime Minister made it very clear on a couple of weeks ago when she said that the UK will be leaving the EU, and thereby we will be leaving the penumbra of the European Court of Justice. We will no longer be subject to European European Union law, and that's the key point. We will get the best possible deal for goods and services for the UK and for the rest of the EU.
Okay. Following on from that, then it sounds to many of us, and this holds no fear from many of our points of view, that we would be prepared, if all else fails in negotiations, to fall back on WTO rules and tariffs. Now, your fellow Secretary of State, for leaving the EU, said that holds no fears. If 170 countries can trade on such a basis and tariffs are as low as 3 to 5%, courtesy of the most favoured nations status, etc., etc., I'm picking up here that it certainly holds no fears for you. I
think you're tempting me, if I may say, Mr. Barron, into getting into what we call running commentary about the negotiations. I'm not going to. I think we can do a great deal that will deliver a result in both goods and services for our businesses and for our friends.
But you wouldn't disagree with your fellow Secretary of State in saying that WTO holds no fears?
Well, as I say, I think it will be getting into the minutiae of the negotiations now.
Okay, let's move on very quickly.
But I think there will be a great deal done.
Yeah. EU division, something we're not picking up. I've raised it on the floor of the House before, but what's your take? I mean, quite understandably, the spotlight is on our negotiating position, but if you look across at the EU, it's quite an interesting situation. You seem to have a split, an emerging split, a growing split, in fact, between the ideologists within the EU Commission and elected politicians who realise that, courtesy of the balance of trade in their favour, playing hardball may not be in their best interests. What can you tell us with regards to that situation as you see it?
I understand that point, and I've heard it quite a lot. I think it's important not to, I haven't actually tested that proposition yet with some of the key Commission people, but my impression is that they are faithful servants of Europe and of the EU, and they will ultimately do what they consider to be in the best interests of the entire Union, and I think that will be a deal that is beneficial to the electorates of the people of Europe, and that's where they'll end up. Of course, a certain amount of plaster has come off the ceiling in Brussels since the vote on June the 23rd. Of course, people feel they have a project. There was a fascinating article in the FT this morning by the French Prime Minister, in which he spelt out this continued show why we were so right to vote to leave, because he very emphatically spelt out this vision for a United States of Europe, a federal system with very defined boundaries, and I'm afraid not an ideal to which I think the British people really aspire, and I think we did the right thing, and I think we can make it work.
Do you think relations few years out, could actually improve the EU, because no longer will they have to contend with those awkward Brits, a thorn in their side, as they march towards ever closer political union, and it could make for a fresh relationship.
Of course, and I'm so glad to hear you speak in those terms. I think Europe is at its best when it's positive about the work it's engaged on, it sets itself a deadline. I think we should view the whole Brexit process as a positive thing. We are sorting out the UK problem. And after all, that has been a problem for decades. We didn't go into Schengen. Critically, we decided to stay out of Stage 3 of monetary union in 1991. That was the moment, that was the basic moment of divergence. And I think all else really flowed from that. And what we're seeing, I think what we saw on June the 23rd, was the logical conclusion of that divergence, of that basic drift by the British people away from that ideal, which is articulated by the French Prime Minister in the paper this morning. We don't want to be part of such a construct. And we've always made it clear. So it's always been very tense, because we said no, we don't agree with this ever closer union. So we don't agree with the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice over this or that. And we've been the backmarkers. And to a certain extent, of course, some other countries have shielded their own apprehensions behind us. But it's up to them now to get on and take the thing forward.
Finally, on Brexit, can I just reinforce what Crispin said earlier, our chairman, about resources? It's going to be terribly. I mean, many of us believe that actually the FCO is under-resourced as it is, that we've been poorly cited in many of our interventions. Some of us have a particular view on those interventions, but put that to one side. The resources are going to be made even more needed now as we become truly globalist, as we look outward-facing, not just to the EU, but outside the EU. An increase in the budget of, £140 million, you know very well, Foreign Secretary, is a drop in the ocean compared to what is required. How forceful are you going to be in lobbying for more funds from where you sit?
Well, I'm going to just say, first of all, I'm grateful to you and indeed to the committee for the tenor of your arguments, because they are most welcome to us, and clearly we want to be arguing that a global Britain needs to be properly represented overseas. I think £140 million, we can make that go a long way. We're very thrifty, parsimonious types in the Foreign Office. We will make good use of that. But clearly we have a big network, a robust network. It needs to be properly funded.
Okay, thank you.
Stephen Gibbs. Thank you. Thank you, Foreign Secretary, for joining us today, and thank you to your colleagues for coming along as well. They are excellent. Some may refer to them as unelected bureaucrats, but we were on this committee.
Well, I'm sorry, don't interrupt you, Mr. Gibbs, but they're the ones that I would far be it from me to criticise bureaucrats anywhere. The unelected ones I was talking about were the ones who will shortly cease to have control over our lives in another European capital.
Right. Okay. Yeah, ones with the skills, but not.
These are the ones who will survive.
Right. Okay. So these unelected bureaucrats are okay, as are the ones in the House of Lords, of course. In terms of your earlier analogy on you guys going off and running the place, I'm going to take it on face value that was about trade rather than any major change in British foreign policy after we leave the European Union. One of the great attractions, obviously, to our partners overseas is access and membership of the single market. Do you still believe we should retain membership of the single market? Just a yes or no, Foreign Secretary.
Well, let's be clear that we are going to get a deal that will be, I think the term, as the Prime Minister herself said, I think the term single market is increasingly useless. We are going to get a deal that will be of huge value, and possibly a greater value if you look at what is still unachieved in services, for instance, in goods and services for our friends on the continent and for business investing in the UK. I make these wearisome points, but we are the single biggest consumers of French champagne, for instance, and indeed of Italian prosecco. We're indiscriminate. We drink both more than anybody else. We import more German cars than any other country. There is, and this is a wonderful fact. and we are going to continue to do that. And any attempt to, as it were, to punish UK financial services, or that I think as the former governor of the Bank of England said this morning or yesterday, that it doesn't make economic sense for Europe. In the end, as I was saying to Mr. Barron...
It's not quite the question I asked. I mean, and also, as you'll be aware, and you'll forgive me for mentioning, the French drink more whiskey in a month than they do cognac in a year, and I suspect that's not going to stop either.
Well, a very good point, if I may say.
Yeah, thank you. And the question I asked was, do you think we should retain membership of the single market, or is it your negotiating objective to retain membership of the single market? Just that's a simple question, without getting into how much we're buying and selling and all the rest of it. But is that your objective?
We are going to get the best possible deal for trade in goods and services. And I think that, as I said, I think the most useful thing I can say to you is that the phrase "single market" probably is one that not many people really understand, and I think that.
I presume you understand.
There are many countries, as Mr. Barron pointed out, that sell very effectively into the single market, and that is certainly what we will do.
So we'll be outside the single market.
Well, we're going to get the best possible deal for trade in goods and services.
So you don't know if we're going to be in the single market or not, is what I take away from this, and what I take away from the Secretary of State for leaving the European Union and his contributions this week, is that nobody appears to have a Scooby, if you like, about what's going to happen. I'll tell you what, I'll do it one last time. Is it even your objective to retain membership of the single market?
Well, we are leaving the European Union.
But
we will continue. Let me try. I read this, you seem to think the single market is sort of like, the Groucho Club or something. We are leaving the European Union. We will continue to have access for trade in goods and services to the EU, and I think we'll do a deal that will be to the benefit of both sides.
You don't know. You didn't ken. Don't have a Scooby. I mean, this is something that's coming out. Can you maybe tell me this thing? 'Cause this is something I'm pushing for as well. Which commissioners have you met with since you took office?
I've principally had dealings with Johannes Hahn and Vice President, High Representative Commissioner Mogherini, because they deal with the foreign affairs side.
Okay, and I appreciate your candour on that. I yesterday put down a written question to the Secretary of State for exiting the European Union about which commissioners he'd met with, because I suspect it's an important relationship to have over these coming months and in the 2 years, once and if you've triggered Article 50. And he says, well, they can't tell us because that's part of a negotiating strategy. Do you think, will ministers be open to tell us which commissioners and they're talking to over this
I'm sure that ministers will have no inhibition about meeting commissioners the whole time. The commissioners are very open and, in my view, charming people. They'll want to engage with us, and my relations with Federica Mogherini and Johannes Hahn are extremely good, and we've had some very good conversations.
Okay. Well, look, as part of this, do you still adhere to what the Prime Minister said when she met with First Minister of Scotland, that there should be an agreed position with devolved administrations before any agreement is signed? An agreed position?
Well, it is certainly the case that the devolved administrations, the overseas territories, they will all be, of course, properly consulted in the course of the negotiations.
Right, but will there be an agreed position? Again, Foreign Secretary, I'm asking you questions now. I'm not sure I'm getting any answers, but we've had a week of that in the Chamber. Will there be an agreed position with the devolved administrations?
What I can tell you is that the devolved administrations will certainly play a role. They will be consulted, but this is a United Kingdom competence. This is something that was decided by the people of the UK. You would expect the government of the United Kingdom to be in the lead in the negotiations. And just one interesting reflection on all this sort of the consultation of Parliament and consultation with the devolved administrations and so on. I've seen plenty of European negotiations and treaty negotiations, and at no stage in the run-up to the climax of those negotiations has there been any attempt to pre-agree a position. with Parliament, let alone with the regions or
sure,
the
but
administrations.
but
so there's a certain amount.
But there is a process.
Certain amount of hokum going
on.
On
the point of process, you're telling me there will not be an agreed position with the devolved administrations. You're saying there will merely be consulted, which goes against what the Prime Minister told the First Minister back at the very start of this. Has there been movement on the involvement of devolved administrations?
I think I've answered your question.
Right, okay. Well, let me ask you one further question on this, if you can't answer that question. You talked about entering the supremacy of EU law. Is there any law that David Cameron signed up to with his European partners that you wouldn't have signed up to?
Well,
as a full member of the Council of Ministers?
I think that the Treaty of Lisbon was a step too far, and I think it was a great mistake, and I think that we should have rejected it. Mm-hmm. I think it unnecessarily expanded EU competence, and I think in particular what it got wrong was the extension of EU competence to the field of human rights, and the notion that this great European Charter of Fundamental Rights should now be justiciable by the European Court of Justice, because that sets up a great deal of confusion with the Strasbourg Court of Human Rights, and it, in my view, leads to all sorts of extensions of EU judicial activism in areas that I think are totally wrong. So that would be an example of the kind of area where I might have disagreed with the previous administration.
Okay, well, I think it's an area that we disagree on as well. I mean, I think having a common set of human rights across this continent is a good thing. Because I'm nearly out of time, I want to ask you very briefly about Syria. I'm mindful of that, Chairman. Yes. In terms of Syria, can you outline for me, I mean, obviously, I think there's a Sky News poll out today saying that UK has a responsibility to protect civilians, but a part of that is obviously trying to get a broader political agreement. Can you tell me of any mapping that you've done of political factions in Syria and any options that you're exploring at the moment for a political agreement? You'll be
familiar with the various maps that currently exist of the divisions of Syria and the...
Sorry, when I say mapping, I mean of the wide variety of different groups that exist.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the bits of work that we've led on, or that the UK has led on, is in building up a broad-based opposition group called the High Negotiations Committee, which is led by a gentleman called Dr. Riyad Hijab, who came to London on the 7th of September with his team, and they were pretty widely drawn from Syrian opposition groupings, military, civil society, and so on. And they laid out a case for transition away from Assad and the kind of Syria they wanted to see, and it was very compelling, democratic, pluralistic. I think with a higher quota for female representation than there currently exists in the Tory party today, and so it was pretty. It was very, very. And certainly in the Labour Party, it was very progressive, and our ambition is to try to get the Russians and the Assad regime to desist from their violence in Aleppo, to get back to a ceasefire, and to renew the negotiations in Geneva. And in that context, those opposition groups, I believe, do carry a lot of credibility, and when they speak, you can see a future for Syria that does not include Assad, sure. Because that is the question that is constantly put to us. Who can replace Assad? Well, there are answers to that question.
I did ask about mapping. I know I'm out of time, so maybe the Foreign Secretary, and I know it's a bigger question, you could write to the committee with some of the details about the work that's been carried out on mapping of that.
But very glad to do so.
Andrew Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Blunt. Good morning, Foreign Secretary.
Good morning.
Delighted to see you in your new role. There's one word that's been missing from this morning's discussion that I've not heard from your lips, and that is the word Commonwealth. Lord Hague said that there was going to be the C back into the FCO. Not much happened after that. What is the new Foreign Secretary intending to do to ensure the Commonwealth is paramount in our long-term planning and thinking for trade, cooperation and friendship?
The Commonwealth, thank you, Mr. Rosendale, and I know that you have long been a champion of the Commonwealth and indeed of Britain's relations with the Commonwealth, and thanks for all the work that you do. Look, the Commonwealth is a wonderful asset for the world. It's a yet another forum in which Britain is able, our country is able to express our values, to get things done and to get things moving. And yes, we see it as vital for our future overseas. We're having the CHOGM, which will, in 2018 is coming probably to this city. There's still some discussion about that. We are using the Commonwealth and our networks to principally, if you think about it, many of the Commonwealth countries are the growth economies of the world. And this has been one of the staggering developments over the last 25 years. While the EU has been mired in low growth, it's actually these Commonwealth countries that have been bounding ahead, and yet we haven't been able, because of our constriction under the EU treaties for 43 years, we haven't been able to do free trade agreements with them. Many of them are now stepping up, volunteering to do these deals. And it's a very, very exciting prospect. And they're one after the other. Australia, Malaysia, New Zealand, they're standing up and saying they want to increase trade with the UK.
So Brexit is an opportunity, in your view, for the United Kingdom to do a whole lot more with the Commonwealth and perhaps rekindle those relationships that we've neglected since we joined the common market. Absolutely,
and I yield to no one in my admiration of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, and I walk around this great palazzo with a daily state of wonder. It has many mansions, and it's a fantastic thing. When I used to go around the world doing trade missions for London, one thing that some of its FCO Wallers used to tell me was that actually they thought there was a huge operation dedicated to the EU, but perhaps not quite enough. Well, he went into some of the other areas, and I'm not saying that I want to subtract our commitment to other European capitals and our European work, because that is obviously vital, and that 44% of our trade is with the EU, and it's colossally important. But there are opportunities, and I meant what I said earlier about the enthusiasm of the people at the FCO. I think they really see this, and they want to do it, and they see an opportunity here.
So I assume you agree with me that the Commonwealth flag should fly from British embassies and high commissions around the world as we remove the European flag.
Let's see, 53.
Sorry, you're okay, Mr. Rosendale. You're testing my sigillography here. Or vexillography, I think is the word I want. The flag of the Commonwealth. I don't think I'm going to make any particular commitments about the flag of the Commonwealth.
You're happy for it to fly from embassies and high commissions?
As soon as somebody can identify it to me, I'll be very happy. Is that it? Okay. I'm going to have to own up, Mr. Rosendale. I'm unaware of the exact configuration of the Commonwealth flag, but there you go.
Okay. Moving on.
What does it look like?
Parts of the...
That's my drawing.
That's a very good drawing.
Okay,
well, that's like a lovely flag. It looks like a lovely. Wait! It looks like a lovely flag, Mr. Rosendale.
Are you happy?
But I'm not going to commit. I'm not going to commit now to flying it.
Could you check that one out and come back to us if that's possible? Yes, would you?
Right.
Oh, that's that one.
Thank you.
Right. If you could come back on that particular point, if that's okay, Foreign Secretary. Could I move on now to the next item? Apart from the Commonwealth, the United Kingdom actually has sovereign power over 21 territories and dependencies, of which 16 of which your department is directly responsible for, one of which is Gibraltar. They are, of course, particularly affected by us leaving the European Union. Can we expect a bit more bulldog spirit now in dealing with Madrid? Can we have a more robust stance in tackling the way Spain has treated Gibraltar, or are we going to continue with the Foreign Office line of effectively diplomatic pussyfooting, which allows Spain to continue to think that they might one day achieve their wish of claiming the rock under the Spanish flag?
You are going to see a completely implacable Marmorian and rock-like resistance on the part of this government to any such claim, and we see no justification in law for that claim. On the other hand, obviously, we see no particular reason to be in any way difficult with our friends in Madrid. If they can raise it with us, and we simply make our points politely but firmly. And I remember if you remember when I think the Spanish foreign minister raised it with me, and I felt that, you remember Marlon Brando in The Godfather? He said, "I'm Mr. Barzini. I must tell you, I'm sorry. My answer is no." And that was the.
But if they do get difficult, and they have become difficult, they've done some things that have made the lives of Gibraltarians pretty bad over the years. Can we expect a thoroughly robust response from now on, rather than effectively diplomatically pushing the issue into the long grass?
Well, I think we've been very clear that we see no grounds whatever for any change to the sovereignty of Gibraltar. The people of Gibraltar, I think by 98.5%, support the status quo, and the status quo is going to remain.
And would you welcome a possibility of a visit to Gibraltar by Her Majesty the Queen? She's not been for over 50 years. People of Gibraltar have asked repeatedly over the last 5 to 6 decades that their Queen visit Gibraltar, but for some reason Foreign Office have never seemed to recommend that to Her Majesty. Would you make a change of policy on that issue?
Well, I'm more than happy to consult the Foreign Office, indeed the Palace, about this. I don't know the thinking behind Her Majesty's itinerary, but obviously, a lot of people want Her Majesty to go to a lot of places at the moment. She's much in demand across the world, as you can imagine, and I think we have to be careful about issuing promises.
Could I also commend you, Foreign Secretary, on your well-known robust stance in terms of supporting self-determination for all the peoples of former British colonies, particularly British overseas territories, Gibraltar, of course, and the Falkland Islands, and others that you've consistently spoken up in favour of self-determination. Can I just confirm that is your view today, that is the view of the British government, that all peoples of all former British colonies should have the absolute right of self-determination?
Of course, that is our view, and if you look at what's happening in the Falklands and our relations with Argentina, in fact, there's we have to be careful, but I think there's the relationship with Buenos Aires is actually improving simply because we're parking the Falklands.
But self-determination is the principle. It's the people themselves.
It's the people
that determine
themselves.
So that includes Gibraltar, the Falklands. Would that include Norfolk Island as well?
I can't remember what the views of the people of Norfolk Island are, but
their views. Would their views be equally as respected as people of the Falkland Islands, to give an example?
We have no intention of changing government policy towards Norfolk Island or its people, and I'm sure their rights will be protected.
So self-determination you support for Norfolk Island?
I support self-determination generally as a principle. I think
How about for the Chagos Islands? Of course, that's a British overseas territory. Their people should have the same rights as the other overseas territories. Would you agree with that, Foreign Secretary?
Well, that is a difficult question because there are, as you know, Chagosians who've been moved from that area, and we're conscious of their concerns, and I've met some of them, and we are in a state where in negotiations about them with them at the moment, but discussions with them at the moment. But the position of Diego Garcia and the rest of those islands remains unchanged.
Okay, and one final, very last question, if I may. Will the government consider the possibility of restoring a royal yacht? And if so, will you be giving your full support to that policy?
It is not a government priority, I must tell you regretfully. And I must also inform you, alas, that the former royal yacht Britannia is, I am told, incapable of being refloated because its engine has been removed, its propellers sawed off, and a hole has been carved in its side to make it into a museum. So you can't do that. What I have said is that if a consortium of philanthropists wished to give Her Majesty a yacht and pay for it, then obviously that's not something that I would impede.
Right.
Thank you.
And Claude.
Or try to impede. Sorry.
Welcome.
Thank you.
There is a bit of good news about Syria over the last 24 hours, in that the United States and are meeting in Switzerland to discuss what may happen in future. And given that that meeting is taking place with Russia, that must be a hopeful development. And in that case, as one speaking of myself who advocated marching outside embassies, would you agree that in this case it would be advisable to wait to see what comes out of this meeting over the weekend, and if it doesn't come out the way we want it to come out, we should involve marching on all the embassies involved in the current situation in Syria?
Thank you, Mr. Claude. I think that obviously we must all hope that the contact between the Russians and the Americans does produce something on Saturday. We've been here before. I think everybody will agree many times. The whole Lavrov-Kerry process ran for quite a while. It did not actually interrupt the bombing. You'll have seen from the front pages of today's papers that continues. People are continuing to die in Aleppo. Far more civilians being killed than militiamen. This is a gross crime against humanity. And you spoke very powerfully in the House the other day about that, and I thought I agreed with every word that you said. And I also thought you were right, by the way, to point out the peculiarity that the Stop the War coalition do not think it suitable to protest against this particular war of aggression against an innocent civilian population. And I think that is an oddity that has been noticed, and I remark upon it again.
The point I'm making is, given the number of players in this horrible situation, that perhaps if this weekend, if they don't come to some agreement, we can also focus attention on the embassies of other countries involved.
Okay, well, let me be very direct then. I think it's important not to let a general sort of blame game diffuse the central responsibility for what is taking place. This is the Assad regime. Of the 400,000 people who have died in Syria, 95% of them have been killed by the Assad regime. They are being backed up by the Russians and the Iranians. Those are the culprits.
That's not true. Is it? How many casualties have the Syrian Arab Army taken?
Well, my information is from the Foreign Office is that the vast majority of the casualties that have been sustained, according to Staffan de Mistura's figures, are the result
is this in the I was assuming you meant the conflict as a whole.
In the conflict as a whole.
I've heard data that the Syrian Arab Army have taken 70,000 fatalities in the course of this conflict. I just think there's a I'll be interested in the point.
Defer to you, Mr. Blunt. Well, but the figures I've been told is that the Assad regime is responsible of the 400,000 fatalities that are regularly quoted by the UN and by the Special Representative Staffan de Mistura. The overwhelming majority, to the best of my knowledge, have been claimed by the Assad regime. And my point to Mrs. Clwyd is that that should be the focus of our outrage. And, as I say, I think it's peculiar that the Stop the War Coalition doesn't see it that way.
Can I ask what policy options you think are open to the UK to respond to events in Aleppo?
Well, as I said in my opening remarks, I think it's very important not to get hopes up too high, because you'll remember what the point that Parliament got to in 2013 when this House took a big step backwards from intervention. I thought that was regrettable at the time, and I know that you did too. And we've vacated the space which has been occupied by the Russians, and our options now are to try on the humanitarian front, to try to find extra ways of getting help into Aleppo, to do what we can to help warn the people of Aleppo about impending airstrikes, to support the White Helmets, to support all types of humanitarian relief, to intensify sanctions on some of the key players in the Assad regime and on the Russians as well. And also, of course, it is right now that we should be looking again at the more kinetic options than the military options. But, we must be realistic about how these, in fact, work and what is deliverable. And certainly, you can't do anything without a coalition, without doing it with the Americans. I think we're still a pretty long day's march from getting that. But that doesn't mean that discussions are not going on, because they certainly are.
Can I ask you about the situation of the Kurds? There's been so much emphasis on the role of the Peshmerga. And of course, the Peshmerga were very useful in liberating people like the Yazidis from Sinjar. But the Turks in particular seem to have now turned against the Kurds. And I wonder how we are going to attempt to protect the Kurds. Having used them and praised them, how do we then protect them?
Well, you're asking an incredibly good question. There's no doubt that there are difficulties with the Turkish-Kurdish relations in the north of Syria, and clearly the Turks have concerns about some groups of Kurds, and they make no distinction between the YPG and the PKK, for instance, and whereas the Americans see things differently. I think one thing everybody agrees, including the Turks, is that the Peshmerga, the Iraqi Kurds who have been so important in driving Daesh out of their bits of Iraq, they have the confidence of the Turkish leadership, and that's been very encouraging.
Mosul, of course, is very much on the agenda at the moment, and the public seems to be very concerned about how we protect the civilians in Mosul once the liberation of Mosul is underway. And I'm not quite clear how that is going to happen.
Well, look, I think that is going to be a huge question for all of us in the course of the months ahead. Mosul must be liberated from Daesh. The question is how to do it in such a way as to minimize civilian loss of life. It's a city of at least 1.5 million people, very largely Sunni. They are not going to want to be liberated, to put it mildly, by Shia militias. It is going to be a very, very difficult and delicate operation, but the nettle has got to be grasped, and it requires a great deal of thought, and it also requires us collectively to think about Mosul post-liberation. How is it going to be ordered? How is it going to be run? Who's going to be in charge? These are all questions we need to be answering now.
What exactly is our role in Mosul? What is the UK doing?
Our role in Mosul at the moment is obviously to help prepare for the liberation of Mosul, and to think about how we will order it. And you may be interested to know that on Sunday I'm calling a meeting of fellow foreign ministers. John Kerry's coming over, my French counterpart, my German counterpart, and others to discuss exactly how we're going to proceed, not just in Syria but in Iraq as well. And I think the general feeling is that obviously it's good that things are happening again in Geneva, but most people, and I think including John Kerry, feel that the process of argument, process of discussion with the Russians has basically run out of road. And on Sunday we'll be talking about all the options that we think are available to us and to the West. And I'm not going to pretend that there is any easy answer here, because there isn't. But I think most people, and I'm interested in what you say about polls from the UK public, most people, I think, are now changing their minds about this, and they're thinking, we can't let this go on forever. We can't just see Aleppo pulverised in this way. We have to do something. And I thought the mood of the House of Commons the other day was very telling. I think it has changed from 2013. Whether that means we can get a coalition together for more kinetic action now, I cannot prophesy. But what most people want to see is a new set of options.
I'll certainly come back to this.
May I ask quickly one?
I did take the briefly.
Can I, Foreign Secretary, can I ask you about the Yemen?
Yes, of course.
Are you satisfied that the protection of civilians is something in our sights, given the horrible stories that are coming out of there, given the role of Saudi Arabia, given our role in selling arms to Saudi Arabia?
Obviously, we have a very elaborate, probably the most elaborate of any arms exporting country, an elaborate system of trying to check that the things we export are being used in conformity with international humanitarian law. And look, I mean, we take all the allegations, all the news from Yemen incredibly seriously. You saw what happened on Saturday in Sana'a. It was extremely worrying. We have to encourage, and we do encourage very strongly, our Saudi friends to go for a ceasefire, to sort this out, and to investigate thoroughly what has taken place, and they are investing that.
Let's try and come back to the Yemen's obviously a very substantial subject, which obviously deserves significant time of its own. Let's see if we can create that time at the end, but Secretary, we may be in your hands at that point. Mike Gates.
Thank you very much. Foreign Secretary, can I go back to your initial remarks where you said you wanted to forge a new identity as a global Britain? You controversially drew attention to the part Kenyan heritage of the United States President, and you yourself, of course, have a part American and part Turkish heritage. Are you part of what the Prime Minister would refer to as a citizen of the world?
Like it used to say that it used to say on the back of the honey in Sainsbury's, didn't it? Produce of more than one country. It used to say, yes, I certainly am in that sense, and I think we all are. The human race probably emerged from Africa. We are all. That's why, by the way, I was so offended by the French Prime Minister's article in the FT today.
Are you offended by the Prime Minister's attack on the people who see themselves as citizens of the world in her speech at your conference?
Did she?
Yes, she did.
Well, I'm a citizen of the UK and a proud citizen of the UK, and so are we all, and that's our primary identity. I also think that we're all, part of the same great species, and we should, it's why I get back to my point. We should be open to people from other countries. We really should, and it's something that has been of immense value, and it's a two-way thing. Britain is the biggest exporter of its own people of all the rich countries. We send Brits abroad, and it's a fantastic thing that we do, and the world, in my view, is better for it. But Britain is also better for having some brilliant people working here.
Good, including perhaps on our plans for how we deal with the European Union people working at the LSE and elsewhere.
No, that was complete, Mr. Gates. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because I'm able to knock that one totally on the head, because that was absolute nonsense. Someone rang up the Foreign Office, and or there was a phone conversation in which it was made clear what is standard procedure. Anybody working for the Foreign Office or for the FCO or as a member of staff or seconded to it has got to get security clearance. That's always been the case. But there is absolutely no reason for anybody who's supplying research data or whatever, or analysis to the to us, to have security.
So nothing's changed.
So and the LSE, I'm afraid to say, inaccurately reported this conversation in an internal email and presented it. Opportunity, or somebody did, some Remainer presented it as a post-referendum change in policy, and it wasn't true. It wasn't true, and it's like everything is now attributed to Brexit. It was total nonsense.
Nothing's changed.
Nothing has changed.
Right, fine, good. Now, can I then ask you about this relationship between your department and the Department for Leaving the European Union? The Secretary of State, your colleague David Davis, came before us a few weeks ago, and I asked him questions about that, and he said, I asked him whether UCREP would be reporting to him or to the FCO, and he said there would probably be a pay and rations link. I don't know. Could you clarify, does UCREP report to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office as well as to the Department for Leaving the EU?
Yes, of course it does, and so do all our, and I have regular contact with Ivan Rogers, who's our Perm Rep, and all European embassies. Obviously, we run the network. But I want to stress, on this is, I think, has been of all the sort of fictions in the media. This is the most the idea that these three competing poles of foreign. It's a complete nonsense. We're working together. The FCO holds the network. We're immensely supportive of the work being done by both DIT and DEXU, and we've got to get on with it.
Okay. And in that context, there's been, since the referendum vote, calls by ministers in France, in Italy, in Germany, for a revitalisation of the acceleration towards an EU defence policy. Now, your colleague, the Secretary of State for Defence, has said that we would block such a development. But given that we are intending to be out of the EU within around 2 years or so, is it wise for us to obstruct what other EU countries wish to do to increase their defence cooperation, won't it actually damage the possibility of us getting a good deal in the negotiations if we take that attitude?
Well, I mean, a couple of points. First of all, I think it's perfectly right to point out, as Michael Fallon has done, that an EU defence pact that undermines NATO is a bad idea, and you know, we've got to make sure that the defence architecture of Europe, of this part of the world, continues to have the Americans very much in it. I think that's something that is widely understood across other European capitals. If our friends want to go ahead with new security architecture, as they have pledged to do, by the way, many times over the last 4 decades, because I remember all of them quite well, I don't think, as you indicate, I don't think post-Brexit we can reasonably stand in their way. I think what we might suggest is that, given that we are the biggest military player in the area, the second biggest, the only other nuclear power, it wouldn't be a bad idea if they do propose, if they do genuinely go ahead with such things, a way in which Britain could be supportive, involved in the enterprise, and I think that might be something that would commend itself to Commissioner High Representative Mogherini and others currently involved in this venture.
Finally, I'm not sure how much time I've got left, Chairman. Right, good, thank you. That, in fact, penultimately, your predecessor but one, William Hague, in November 2012, said that the UK recognised the National Coalition of Syrian Revolution and Opposition Forces as the, quote, sole legitimate representative of the Syrian people. Now, there were some questions about that. I myself queried it in terms of, did it really represent all the opposition forces? Is it still the position of the government that the National Coalition are the sole legitimate representative of the Syrian people?
No, I think what we're saying is that the High Negotiations Committee, which is this broadly based body,
which is wider than the...
Which is wider.
Yeah.
I think has a great deal of credibility. They should be at the centre of the Geneva negotiations. But I don't exclude that there might be others who could also have a claim. And we should not be so Cartesian about this. If there are others who want to be useful to the future of Syria, then of course their claims should be considered. If they're democratic, if they're pluralistic, and so on.
To be clear, you're confirming that the government no longer regards the National Coalition as the sole legitimate representative?
Well, what I'm saying is that we think that the HNC is a powerful and credible voice for those opposition groups.
Okay, well, we maybe want to explore that. Finally, during the urgent this statement that we had on the debate, which Andrew Mitchell introduced a couple of days ago, parallels were drawn between what Russia is doing in Aleppo with what the Nazis did in Guernica. Given that the history of what Russia has done in Ukraine, what it did in Georgia, what it did internally in its own country in flattening Grozny, isn't it time for us to fundamentally reassess our attitude to Russia? And linked to that, given the threats to the Baltic states, the positioning of nuclear-tipped missiles in Kaliningrad, which can potentially hit Berlin as well as Poland, and the revelations about the hacking of the Democratic National Committee and the attempts to interfere in the American election process, do we not need to have a fundamental reassessment of our attitude to Russia?
Well, I heard your powerful speech the other day too about in the Commons about Guernica and the Russian bombing, and I think your feelings are shared by millions of people in this country. I think two points. It is very important to stress that we have no quarrel with the Russian people. We are not hostile to Russia as a country, far from it. And I would go further, and I would say that I don't believe that Russia is as, for all its very, very, it's doing many terrible things, as you rightly say. But I don't think that Russia today can be compared with the Soviet Union that I remember as a child. I don't think that it is as much of a threat to the stability of the world as the former Soviet Union. I don't think it's entirely right to talk about a new. I think it's right to talk about a new Cold War. But it is obvious, and you correctly list the ways in which Russia is being reckless and aggressive. It is obvious that we have a serious problem, and our sanctions are biting. The Russian economy shrank by, I think, almost 3.5% more last year. It is tough for people in Russia, but the regime seems determined to remain on its present course. I think we have to remain very, very tough. And it's the UK that is in the lead, both in the UN Security Council, in drafting and passing resolutions on Russia's behaviour. It's the UK that has escalated the question of whether the bombing of Aleppo may amount to a war crime. And it's the UK that's in the lead in making sure that we keep the sanctions tight on Russia because of what's happening in Ukraine. And there is another terrible conflict, 9,200 lives claimed in eastern Ukraine. Mr. Gates, I cannot disagree with your analysis. We have a very serious problem. But we have to engage with Russia. We have to persuade the Russian government. We have to persuade Vladimir Putin that there is another path for him and for his government, and that if he will lead the way and bring peace to Syria, then he will deserve credit and the thanks of the people of this world. But if he continues on the present path of barbarism, then I'm afraid, as I said in the House, Russia is in danger of being reduced to the status of a rogue nation. And I think that would be a tragedy if you consider where we were 25 years ago when we had such hopes at the end of the Cold War. We really thought that it could all be so different. I don't want us to get back into a logic of endless confrontation with Russia at every part of the world. That would be crazy. We have so much. There are things we have to do together. We have to fight terror together. Russian people, Russian holidaymakers and British holidaymakers both face the threats of being blown out of the sky by terrorists. We have things we must do together. We have common interests. But at the moment, the behaviour of the Russian government is making it very, very difficult for us to pursue those interests together.
Whilst we're on this subject, before I get on to Syria, what effect do you think the sanctions are having on Russia with regard to Ukraine?
Well, as I said,
specifically, are they changing Russian policy?
No. I mean, so the sanctions are biting. As I said, the Russian economy has shrunk. I mean, the effect of the sanctions is hard to distinguish from the result of the collapse in the price of hydrocarbons. But there's no doubt that the sanctions have hurt the Russians, particularly in their ability to raise finance. We must continue that pressure, and it's not uncontroversial with our European friends. There are plenty of my fellow foreign ministers in the EU who have told me privately that they feel their economies are feeling the pressure of these sanctions because, after all, they may have considerable trade with Russia. Our own trade with Russia, as you know, as the committee will know, has fallen dramatically following these sanctions. They are having an effect on both sides, but at present there is no chance.
So the difficult conundrum you face is we're now examining, presumably over the course of the activity over the weekend that's coming, about what to do about Russian action in Syria, is that so far the levers available to us over the Ukraine have no policy effect.
Well, I wouldn't go so far as to say that.
European partners saying they're now questioning, presumably, either their efficacy or their effect on their own economies.
No, I wouldn't go so far as to say that. I think that they are certainly having an effect. They're biting. I think that the strategy of the Russians, of the Kremlin, seems to be basically to keep the Donbass region in a state of turmoil, to make Ukraine very difficult politically to govern as a united whole, and I'm afraid that we could be in for a long haul here. But I think it would be a mistake.
I'm interested to explore this. Chart a route as to how we get Russia out of the cul-de-sac it's placed itself.
It needs. I'm afraid it needs both sides in Ukraine to make progress. And I do think the Minsk. I went there to see for myself what was going on. And you mustn't. Members of the committee mustn't underestimate the psychological effect on the people of Ukraine of this war. I mean, they have lost lots of people, and they feel very, very deeply.
We're going next week, so
I'm delighted to hear that. They feel very deeply and very bitterly about what Russia is doing. But it is also true that, and it's incredibly difficult as a result for Ukrainian politicians, but it's also true that they have to try and take the thing forward. There needs at some stage to be a democratic process in the Donbass region. The Minsk process has got to get going. That means that there must be reform in Ukraine, and progress is perhaps not as fast as the Ukrainian leadership would like.
But my question was picking up your wider strategic point about the need to have a constructive relationship with Russia and all the interests we actually do have in common. And yet at the same time you're using rhetoric about Russia becoming a pariah state. The terms under which our ambassador in the UN spoke about Russia were extremely severe, presumably on your instruction. How are we going to get Russia into a place where we can begin to have that kind of constructive relationship? I know you have the obviously Mr. Barrow next to you, who's obviously something of an authority in this area.
He is, and both Kiev and Moscow he's represented us. So look. It's very important. I just want to get back to what I was saying to Mr. Gates. Russia is a great country. I'm a Russophile. I went there when I was 16. It's an extraordinary culture and civilization from which we can learn endlessly with profit. We should be friends with the Russians. We should be building relations. We should be keeping channels open. We should be constantly talking to them. We must not get into a logic of a new Cold War. I think that would be totally wrong. But I think the route forward is for us to recognise that about Russia, to acknowledge that Russia's importance and on the world stage, but to make it clear that recognition is only possible if they will cease from what I'm afraid are barbaric acts in Aleppo. And in Syria, and if they will find a way forward in Ukraine. I mean, I think the committee can see that what's happened to the former Soviet Union over the last 25 years. I mean, everybody can see the reasons why the Russians might collectively feel that they'd been squeezed. They've lost huge amounts of territory that they once conceived of as belonging to them. They see NATO ringed around. You have to see things to a certain extent from the Russian point of view. But the Russians have got to understand that the way forward for them is to do the right thing, and doing the right thing means doing a deal in in Syria, and let's hope that John Kerry and his counterpart have success on Saturday. Let's see where we get, and doing a deal in Ukraine. But the points that Mr. Gates makes about Russian cyber activity and all that, those are, I'm afraid, valid, and we need to think about them. But the answer is to engage. Sorry.
Okay. Moving then back to Syria, we're doing an inquiry into Russia, and we'll take the opportunity to take evidence from you or responsible minister, and hopefully Mr. Barrow, before we conclude that inquiry. Turning back to Syria and our understanding of the Syrian position, which was behind my question about the challenge of casualties. How well do we understand the reasons for the resilience of the Assad regime? And I wonder if there is anything further you can say on the casualties. Because I understood that the Syrian Arab Army had taken 70,000 fatalities, which would be something which would be obviously significally more than 5%.
Yeah, no, I understand that. Would you forgive me?
And is the carnage on both sides here? And are we is there a misappreciation of why people in Syria, we might not like it, as to why they're looking to the regime for security, because they're fearful of the Islamist threat?
Look, I mean, clearly, one of the things that Assad did almost immediately in 2011 was, as you know, to open the jails and release the Islamists and to create this false equivalence between and to create this scenario in which he was inviting everybody to choose between himself and a bunch of jihadis, and that is not true. There is a significant moderate opposition. I can't give you the figures, I'm afraid, for the casualties that have been sustained by the Syrian Arab Army. I will be very happy.
Turning then to the moderate.
If I can write to you about that, I'd be very happy.
Okay, I'll be grateful. Turning to the moderate opposition and the hard power that the HNC and the Free Syrian Army have on the ground, give us your assessment of exactly what hard power they have in this conflict. Because the evidence this committee's taken suggests that that's not particularly great.
Yeah. Well, this has been a subject of a great deal of controversy. I remember the former Prime Minister used a figure of 70,000, as I recall, in the House for the number of, as it were, moderate opposition fighters. I'm not going to give you a particular figure. I'm told that they are their numbers are still very substantial, though obviously one of the disasters of what's been happening is that the moderate people, as a result of the behaviour of the Assad regime and the feeling that no one is sticking up, some of them have become more radicalised. I don't think there's any particular controversy about that, but there are still large numbers of large areas, I think in Homs, in Hama, in Aleppo, in many parts of Syria, which are basically run by a moderate opposition, and we should never forget that. Our
Syria strategy is obviously now under some reassessment, as it is with all these meetings we're having over had over the weekend. Are those meetings going to include? I've seen reports that might include a foreign minister meeting between Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, alongside the United States and Russia. Could you give us a picture of what the diplomatic activity is this weekend, which obviously, and how it comes together on Sunday?
Well, what we're doing on Sunday is bringing together like-minded countries to see what. Everybody will know that the Syrian diplomacy has been conducted basically through the International Syria Support Group, the ISSG, and so that has brought together 25 countries, a very big forum with the Russians and the Americans, as it were, sitting as joint chairs, and everybody else around the table. So they've had the Iranians, and everybody there. It, in the end, has not worked. The last session was extremely acrimonious, as speaker after speaker effectively denounced the Russian position, and it turned into a sort of slanging match in which the Iranians came to the assistance of the Russians, and the conversation really got nowhere. We need to think about what our options are, and so on Sunday we will be getting the John Kerry and others, a like-minded group. I can't give you the exact cost list at the moment because it's in the process of being assembled, but it will be like-minded countries who wish to canvass all the options. And I just repeat my caution to the committee. Those options, of course, include more kinetic action, but there are grave difficulties involved, as the Prime Minister said in the House yesterday.
Take us through the... presumably one of the prime difficulties at the moment is the current American administration has set its face against no-fly zones, presumably because of the difficulties you're alluding to. What change do you think there might come with a new administration under the stated policies of Hillary Clinton?
I think it's really too early to say, and I've had discussions with some people in Washington who may or may not be close to any future administration, but I just think Hillary Clinton has taken a tougher line on Syria than perhaps the current White House, but I really think it would be it's too early to prophesy.
How close do you think the Russians and the Assad regime are to achieving their military objectives?
I would not like to speculate. I think that the tragedy is that they might achieve what they think are their military objectives, but that would not be a victory. And they've got to understand that whatever happens, they will not have conquered they will not have recaptured the people of Syria. Even if he has done too much damage, he has murdered too many people ever to have a claim to be the ruler of united Syria again. And so I think we are right to say that he cannot be part of the solution. There's got to be a transition away from Assad. We do not say that has to happen immediately, but it must happen. And Resolution 2254 sketches out the route map, a 6-month period of continuity, then 18 months of a condominium between the Assad regime, elements of the Assad regime, and the opposition, but Assad going. I think that's got to be part of it. And don't forget, it was only a few years ago, in 2012, that the Russians were they were on the verge of dumping him themselves. So this thing is possible, and people should not lose hope.
We've had a discussion at the beginning of this about the efficacy of sanctions on Russia vis-à-vis the Ukraine. What measures could we, short of kinetic engagement, which...
in Ukraine?
No, with regard to Syria.
Yeah.
What sanctions would be available given Russian action in Syria?
Well...
and how would you differentiate those sanctions with the sanctions that apply to Russia on Ukraine?
Clearly, the big anomaly in the whole issue of sanctions against Russia is that much of Western Europe continues to take huge amounts of Russian gas. And, there are some European countries who say that that's where the sanctions should go next. Now, that would be very difficult because I think 50% of German gas supplies come from Russia. That's big stuff, and that would be damaging to those economies as well as to Russia.
I'm going to allow my colleagues. I hope we can continue this until 11 o'clock. I just want to return briefly to Europe. On Brexit, you said we're going to get the best possible deal for trade and services. It's not in our gift, is it? It's perfectly possible there might be no deal because we can't command the 27 on the other side of the table. And the difficulty we face is that, I think you may have heard my question to the Brexit Secretary, that the better the deal looks for the United Kingdom, the more difficult it is politically to deliver amongst the 27. And it may get vetoed by the European Parliament anyway, and we can't control that Parliament, let alone ours. But,
which is why I think it's so important to get back to recast this whole conversation and to look at Brexit as an evolution in the development of the EU and as a solution to the British problem, and to stop thinking of it as this acrimonious divorce. It's not going to be like that. This is going to be the development of a new European partnership between Britain and the EU, and it will be beneficial for both sides.
However,
that's the way to look at it.
However, the first phase of that might be a 2-year negotiation which does not end in a deal.
Well, let's see where we get to. I think it's profoundly interesting for both sides to do a deal.
What I'm inviting you to do is assist this committee in identifying what the consequences of no deal would be, because business and commerce and industry could do with a deal of certainty about just what, if the worst case scenario is no deal, well, how bad is that? What are the implications? What does it mean for trade policy into the WTO? And this committee was very critical of the last government, and I notice in your response to our report on the implications of Brexit, in your rather brief letter, we might be asking you to give us a slightly more substantive reply to that report, that you offered no defence to this committee's charge that the last administration had been grossly negligent in failing to do any contingency planning that the electorate might actually vote for Brexit. And I think you should be we should be making it clear to business, industry and commerce what the implications of no deal would be, because no deal is perfectly possible and we cannot control the outcome of these negotiations.
Well, a couple of points. I don't obviously take any particular responsibility for the failure of the government to produce a plan.
It was evident in your letter
for Brexit, since after all it was one of the central charges that I was making in the run up to June the 23rd. But seriously, on the deal no deal question, I think there will be a deal. I think it'll be a great deal. If and I don't for one moment suppose this to be the case, it can't be done in 2 years, then there are mechanisms for extending the period of discussion. I don't think that will be necessary. I think we can do it, and we can produce.
No, I think your characterisation of it is correct. Is this the first stage of the evolution of a process for new relationships in the UK and the EU, and it may be that we will move towards a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement in the usual timescale for the EU doing these things.
I mean, I think
but we need to give some degree of certainty to industry and commerce for the investment decisions they've got to take over the next 2.5 years, and I'm wondering whether you're going to assist this committee in doing that in that process.
Yes, I mean, I think they can be absolutely certain that Britain will remain the number one place to invest in this region, simply because of our time zone, the language, the skills base, our incredible diversity of our economy in the 21st century sectors of the economy. We are the place to come, and that is going to be a giant fact of life. Even if we and our partners are so foolish as not to do a great deal in goods and services. I think we will. I'm absolutely confident we will, because it's profoundly in the interests of elected politicians like ourselves over the channel to do it for the good of their constituents. That's what this is all about. This isn't about, in the end, this isn't about theology. This isn't about the ideology of the European Union. That is entirely secondary to the imperative of taking forward the European economy, a strong European economy, and a strong UK economy.
I look forward to the active assistance of the office in what will be our inquiry into the consequences of no deal. Mike Gates and John Barrett and
Sanctions on
just
Russia.
very, very briefly. That's good.
We currently we implement European Union sanctions, and we, as you've said, we are at the forefront of pressing for those. When we leave the EU, will we still be implementing the EU sanctions, or will we, because we have a more robust attitude, move towards a position like the United States and perhaps move towards a Magnitsky Act or something similar?
Well, I think an extremely good question, and one I've been thinking a great deal about how exactly it's going to work between, and we've been thinking about it with our European friends, because clearly they want us to stick with them in a broad way when it comes to these foreign policy questions. Do you do it? Do you have to do it do we all have to be around the table in the EU Council, or are there other intergovernmental mechanisms that we are going to produce to reflect the new European partnership between Britain and the EU that will mean we can do it in a different way? Either way, I think we're coming out of the treaties. Whatever we do will be done purely intergovernmentally, and I think there's going to be a strong interest on both sides to have a concerted approach. But what's interesting is, it might be that there will be scope for the UK sometimes to do things to go further. It might also be that we would want to keep serried ranks and march forward together. So that's a discussion that we're obviously going to have over the course of the negotiations.
I'll ask my colleagues in a final question to be very brief, and then you're in your hands as to how long the answers take. John Barron.
Foreign Secretary, can I just press you a little bit on Syria, in the sense that I would urge, and many of us here in Parliament would urge you to be careful what you wish for, and urge caution when it comes to contemplating additional military force. You will be the first to recognise that Syria represents a multi-layered conflict involving Shia, Sunni, the old Persian Gulf rivalry, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Russia in the West. Then you've got in the mix jihadists, Islamists, extremists, etc. If history is anything to go by, our involvement in Iraq, Helmand, Libya, and the fact that we've almost changed sides in Syria between 2013 and 15, intentionally or not, we have got to progress with caution, because force in the end has not always been wholly positive, and there are many in this place who have so far remained silent on this issue, but perhaps will raise their heads if it looks as though we're going down, repeating previous errors when it comes to military intervention.
I absolutely accept that and understand that, and although there were, and by the way, I understand completely what you mean about the voices of caution that weren't raised the other day in Parliament. I think we did have lots of passionate voices raised in favour of no-fly zones and so on. And as I say, it's vital that we consider them, and we will do that now. But the points that you make are certainly valid.
Okay,
thank you.
Stephen Gittins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, Foreign Secretary, and thank you for staying so long and for your evidence. Earlier on, I asked you about just after I accused you of not having a clue or a Scooby, you said you were unhappy that David Cameron had signed up to the Lisbon Treaty, but of course Gordon Brown signed the Lisbon Treaty. Just for the record, are there any other? Would you like to answer that question in terms of what David Cameron signed up to?
Let me just clarify. If you remember, there was a pledge that we were going to have a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, which we then, in my view, regrettably, did not carry through. That was what I was referring to. And,
okay, rather than the treaty he'd signed.
And I should just one thing I should also clarify. I referred to moderate fighters in Homs. I should have said north of Homs, just for the record.
Thank you. Anthony.
Foreign Secretary, do you think we should suspend arms sales to Saudi Arabia so we are satisfied that they are not being used against civilians in Yemen?
Well, I repeat what I said about our deep concern about what is happening in Yemen, and on the export licensing, we have one of the most robust systems in the world, and we do consider each one against the each license application against the consolidated criteria, and export licenses that do not meet those criteria are not licensed. But we are keeping this under, I can tell you, a very careful review at present.
You will have noted the report we made on this and dissented from that report. But
I did notice that.
But there is a view of this committee and the requirement about getting proper investigations, independent investigations underway into the Saudi Arabia's conduct, the coalition's conduct of the operations there. Andrew Rosendale.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One issue that's unresolved in Europe, nothing to do with the European Union, is the issue of Cyprus. Will the Foreign Secretary undertake to work with the Republic of Cyprus and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus to work for a fair and amicable solution, whilst at the same time not conceding sovereignty over the British sovereign basis of Akrotiri and Dhekelia?
Look, I think we're on the potentially on the verge of some great progress in Cyprus, and I pay tribute to both leaders on both sides, Mr. Anastasiades and to Mr. Kunchau, who I met them both, and Mr. Kasulides, the foreign minister in New York. And the Turks are playing their role, the Greeks are playing their role. We obviously have a role too, and our bases the territory of our bases is, as you know, is huge in Cyprus. We're willing to cede some of that territory that we don't need to help move the process forward, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's too early to count our chickens in Cyprus. It really is. But I think Cyprus is one of the examples, of few examples in the world, of two leaders who are willing to something about lack of leadership. These two guys are trying to make a difference for peace and being willing to take a risk with the electorates behind them, rather than just solely, obeying the narrow party politics of the group that's got them into power. They are really reaching out for peace, and I think they're doing a great thing.
Well, Secretary of State, your predecessor, I think, said pretty much the same thing a year ago. So let's hope that
I think I said it was too early to count our chickens.
We're going to bring it home or contribute to bringing it home on Cyprus. Thank you very much for your evidence this morning. Sir Tim, I fear I may have referred to you as Mr. Barrow in the course of which my apologies. But thank you to you and Sir Simon for accompanying the Secretary of State. Thank you very much for this morning's evidence. Order. The meeting's now adjourned.